Hey everybody out there in YouTube land. How are you all? Yes, it's true. After 3 months more of a hiatus, I am back again and wanted to cover some of the big news stories this week. But first, just wanted to share an update. In case you folks didn't know, I actually had a birthday last week. And it's actually interesting. I share the same birthday as Kim Iverson. I didn't know that. I don't know if we were born the same year, but I turned 37. And I'm celebrating today by drinking some Budweiser Zero. I don't know if you folks have seen this in the store. I put on a few pounds over the last couple months, so I thought I was buying some zero-calorie beer. And I thought that's what this was. But apparently, there is no such thing as zero-calorie beer. And this is actually zero-alcohol beer. So I'm celebrating today with a non-alcoholic beer, and hope you folks are out there celebrating too. Just going to make sure that we are live today. I know last time I was doing some live streams, we've had some issues with the live chat, so making sure that that's actually working here. Let's see on the screen here if you guys are there. Ah, there you are. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the birthday wishes. I appreciate it. So yeah, hopefully I can pull up the live chat here, and your support is appreciated as always. There we go. And also, folks, if you are not a patron, if you wouldn't mind supporting me on Patreon, that's also appreciated. As you can see, I've lost a few between all these hiatuses, and I'm now down to only 112 patrons. So if you're on Patreon, if you could support me there, that would be much appreciated. But let's get into the news stories today, folks, and I am excited about this news story. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is going to be running for president. This is breaking news from the past 24 hours. And I know many folks out there, like myself, have become pretty disillusioned with electoral politics. We've gone through these phases of Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump and Tulsi Gabbard. And, Jesse Ventura, that whole debacle with him getting gaslit out of not running for the Green Party nomination. Howie Hawkins himself and the whole issues within the Green Party. So there's been a lot of issues overall with the electoral process that we've seen just in the last few years. So, this is one of those Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football type things. But I have to say, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he, not just coming from the Kennedy dynasty there, but also everything that he stood for over the last couple of years, standing up against the COVID tyranny and the the vaccine. I gotta be careful again talking on YouTube, but everything that he stood for the last couple of years, it's been very inspirational. So I don't know if he stands a chance, but it's inspirational at least to see that he's going to be part of the conversation. And there definitely needs to be some indictment of the Democratic Party establishment, particularly on COVID, but also on foreign policy. So this is great to see. I'm going to read this now. This is what BBC had to say about this. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has filed election paperwork to run for U.S. president in 2024 as a Democrat. The 69-year-old is the son of assassinated Senator Robert F. Kennedy and nephew of President John F. Kennedy. The environmental lawyer's campaign treasurer, John E. Sullivan, confirmed the filing on Wednesday. Mr. Kennedy is an outspoken anti-vaccine campaigner. Instagram removed his account in 2021 for repeatedly sharing debunked claims, the company said. Both Democratic and Republican parties hold their own contest called primaries to find the presidential nominee. Mr. Kennedy will be a rank outsider for the Democratic nomination. President Joe Biden has indicated he will run for re-election, though he has not yet formally declared his candidacy. He was previously expected to launch his campaign in early April, but aides say his timeline has shifted. CBS News, the BBC's U.S. partner, has reported he is expected to formally announce a run in early summer. Last month, another Democrat, Marianne Williamson, joined the presidential race. On the Republican side, Donald Trump was first to declare his candidacy and has been joined by others, including former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. In March, Mr. Kennedy said on Twitter he was considering a run for president. At the time, he said, quote, "If I run, my top priority will be to end the corrupt merger between state and corporate power, aka fascism, as defined by Mussolini. Between state and corporate power that has ruined our economy, shattered the middle class, polluted our landscapes and waters, poisoned our children, and robbed us of our values and our freedoms. Mr. Kennedy told a New Hampshire crowd in March that he had, quote, passed the biggest hurdle, his wife green-lighting the run. As the co-founder of an environmental law firm, Mr. Kennedy won plaudits for campaigning on issues such as clean water, including working to clean up the Hudson River in New York. But his anti-vaccine views go back years and have provoked a strong backlash, including from his own family. In 2021, his sister Carrie Kennedy called him, quote, very dangerous on the issue. In 2019, 3 other family members penned an op-ed in the news outlet Politico denouncing Mr. Kennedy's anti-vaccine views. His sister, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, brother Joseph P. Kennedy II, and niece Maeve Kennedy McKean said his views were, quote, tragically wrong and have deadly consequences. In 2022, Facebook and Instagram removed accounts for an anti-vaccine group founded by Mr. Kennedy, Children's Health Defense, for, quote, repeatedly violating company policies on medical misinformation. Although Mr. Kennedy's vaccine skepticism long predates COVID, he found a new audience during the pandemic when revenues to Children's Health Defense doubled to $6.8 million. Mr. Kennedy also published a book, The Real Anthony Fauci, in which he accused the former U.S. infectious disease chief of, quote, a historic coup d'etat against Western democracy. He also invoked Nazi Germany during an anti-vaccine speech in Washington, D.C. last year. Mr. Kennedy has a voice disorder, spasmodic dysphonia, which affects his muscles in his voice box. He married actress Cheryl Hines in 2014, and he lives in Los Angeles, California. So again, folks, I have been disillusioned by electoral politics quite a bit. I personally felt like I've just fallen for psyop after psyop after psyop. But, I think it's a good thing that at least within the Democratic Party, we're going to see some pushback on, the COVID vaccine regime. And, particularly just to, revisit the subject, because it seems like after the invasion of Ukraine, we have seen COVID just kind of get wiped from people's memories and everything went back to normal. And it's really crazy if you think about it. If you think back to where we were 3 years ago right now, how the world was shutting down and how everything was closing off. And then the following year, how people were being threatened that they were going to lose their livelihoods if they didn't get vaccinated. It's really crazy to think how we went from that to now just everything's back to normal. It's just very bizarre. So it's good to at least revisit that, to have an indictment of the Democratic Party for everything that they did, during 2020, 2021, 2022. And it's also good to have some criticism of the foreign policy of the Democratic Party. Again, I feel as though Tulsi Gabbard's eventual endorsement of Joe Biden was really unfortunate. But I think, it was a good thing that there was some conversation within the Democratic Party in 2020, 2019, about the foreign policy. And, many of the things that Tulsi Gabbard was warning about have just gotten worse, right? We are now really on the cusp of nuclear war, and she was warning about that back in 2019. So, I think it's always valuable to have this as part of the conversation. I don't think he actually could get nominated, especially if Joe Biden is running again. Now, if Biden wasn't running again, maybe he might have a shot. If it's between him, Buttigieg, and Kamala Harris, and they're dividing the neocon vote, maybe he has a shot. But, as it stands now, I just think that the Democratic Party is so rigged and the American electoral process is so rigged. I don't think he's actually going to win the presidency, but it is good to have him part of the conversation. And, of course, you're probably wondering, how did the corporate media outside of BBC cover Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s announcement? Well, let's listen to how it was announced on CNN. And, folks, prepare yourself. This might be a little too loud. Sorry. I'm not sure if the volume on this video might be loud, so just heads up on that. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
This just into CNN. Anti-vaccine quack Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has filed paperwork with the Federal Election Commission to run for president as a Democrat. In launching his presidential bid, Kennedy is the latest in a long line of family members to enter politics. So far, only Marianne Williamson, who last month launched her second long shot campaign, has entered the Democratic primary against Biden. Kennedy is such a healthcare menace. In 2019, even his cousins wrote an op-ed criticizing his anti-science views on life-saving vaccines.
So he's a quack and he's anti-science. That's how they are announcing RFK Jr. and his run for office here. Nothing about, his family, nothing about any other work that he's ever done. And it's so funny to me because, again, we get pitched in the United States that we have a free press, right? It's North Korea, it's China, it's Iran, it's all these other bad guy countries who, they have state media. They don't have a free press. What do you call this? This is just such pro-regime propaganda. And, anybody who even challenges the regime as an outsider, they have to immediately start demonizing him. And they're just totally going to work on him now. He's anti-vaccine. He's anti-science. He's a quack. He's the black sheep of the Kennedy dynasty. So this is what we're going to see and hear for the next year and a half about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They're going to completely demonize him, say that he is, he's just a quack and he's anti-science, anti-life, whatever kind of nonsense this is. So that's U.S. state media propaganda on that front. But again, I'm optimistic about at least having a different voice in the race. I think that's important. And, I think too, again, just to kind of talk about the foreign policy a bit, I did retweet something that RFK Jr. tweeted out. I thought I did at least. Well, regardless, I think he at least. Oh, here we go. This is a tweet that I really appreciated and just wanted to kind of share this with you here. The collapse of the U.S. influence over Saudi Arabia and the kingdom's new alliance with China and Iran are painful emblems of the abject failure of the neocon strategy of maintaining U.S. global hegemony with aggressive projections of military power. China has displaced the American empire by deftly projecting instead economic power. Over the past decade, our country has spent trillions bombing roads, ports, bridges, and airports. China spent the equivalent building the same across the developing world. The Ukraine war is the final collapse of the neocon short-lived American century. The neocon projections in Iraq and Ukraine have cost $8.1 trillion, hollowed out our middle class, made a laughingstock of the U.S. military power and moral authority, pushed China and Russia into an invincible alliance, destroyed the dollar as the global currency, cost millions of lives, and done nothing to advance democracy or win friendships or influence. And I think this is, really great, a great summary of, what the regime has done to the United States, to the world, and how it is all falling apart, how we are seeing right now an end of U.S. hegemony because, in the end, the neocon plan, it's just suicidal. I mean, we saw that even, with the Bush regime and how they alienated themselves from, the world, from the American public. And the Democratic Party has really just become a woke, softer version of that same neocon philosophy. And again, it's imploding, and not just domestically, but also again on the world stage, like Robert F. Kennedy is showing here. We're seeing the collapse of the U.S. dollar. We're seeing the tragedy in Ukraine with everything that's happening to that country because we are trying to expand NATO there. And have been since the Bush regime. And, as I've covered on this show previously, George W. Bush was really the architect of trying to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. And that's really, when we started seeing these fissures between the U.S. and Russia. So, again, I think it's really great to have a well-known, famous person like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., again, part of the Kennedy dynasty, an heir to, everything that John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, his father, stood for, who are, again, staples of the Democratic Party, right? Like this is, you think about the Democratic Party, you really think about the Kennedys, Ted Kennedy as well. So, I think it's important to have somebody well known like that, and then also somebody who has shown moral courage, particularly on the issue of COVID, standing up against the establishment within the Democratic Party. Whether or not he actually has a shot, again, I'm just honestly not that optimistic, but I am really, encouraged by the fact that he's showing more courage here. He's standing up, and he's putting himself on the line, because we know that, again, CNN, MSNBC, New York Post, just the U.S. state media apparatus, that is the U.S. corporate media, they're going to completely demonize him. So kudos to him. And, if he'd like to be on this show, I'd love to interview him and talk about these issues, because, again, I think on a couple fronts here, he's showing a lot of courage. So with that, folks, let's move on to the big news story of the week. And that, of course, is the arrest of Donald Trump and the indictment on 34 misdemeanor counts that were bumped up to being felony charges. And if you haven't been following, effectively what they're saying is that he lied on, regarding campaign finance and business records. And because that lie was done in coordination or defense of another larger crime, they are thus being bumped up to felony charges. And if he's indicted, he could theoretically spend over 100 years in prison, which, of course, wouldn't happen. But, I think it's pretty transparent to most people, unless you're a complete Democratic partisan, that this is, really politically motivated. The timing of this is being done to damage Donald Trump going into the 2024 election. And Donald Trump himself, he talked about the connections to Chuck Schumer's family and the timing of Nancy Pelosi being in New York when this happened during his speech the other night. But following this, I thought this was an interesting story that Donald Trump has been urging the defunding of the Justice Department and the FBI. And again, traditionally, you would think of this as being the left-wing position, right? If you think of everything that the FBI has done by assassinating and arresting and disrupting activists in the United States for, since its inception, really. And even just recently with, the persecution of different groups in the U.S., it's really been, a left-wing position to defund, if not disband, the FBI. So here we see Donald Trump saying that. And again, this is something that you think that you would traditionally think that a left-winger, a Bernie Sanders, let's say, may be advocating for, or, a Dennis Kucinich, or, Ralph Nader, those kinds of folks. So this is from Reuters. Former President Donald Trump on Wednesday called on his fellow Republicans in Congress to slash funding for the U.S. Justice Department and the FBI one day after pleading not guilty in New York to 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. Trump, who is seeking to regain the presidency in 2024, took aim at federal law enforcement authorities, even though the criminal charges against him, first brought against any former sitting president, were pursued not by them, but by the Manhattan District Attorney. But Trump faces 2 Justice Department criminal investigations led by Special Counsel Jack Smith, who was appointed by U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland. Both have seemed to accelerate in recent months. Republicans in Congress should defund the DOJ and the FBI until they come to their senses, Trump wrote on his social media platform. DOJ stands for Department of Justice. Trump's proposal is unlikely to be heeded by Congress, with Democrats controlling the Senate and Republicans leading the House of Representatives. It would also be a sharp turn for Republicans, who in the past have supported robust funding for law enforcement and have criticized proposals from some on the left in recent years to defund local police departments. Congressional Republicans have called for sharp federal spending cuts in return for voting to raise the U.S. debt ceiling, but have yet to put forward specific proposals. The FBI, part of the Justice Department, is the U.S. Domestic Intelligence and Security Agency. Trump himself appointed the current FBI director, Christopher Wray, after firing its previous chief, James Comey, in 2017. Trump backed spending increases for the Justice Department while serving as president from 2017 to 2021. Its budget increased 4% during that span to $38.7 billion, White House figures show. One of the special counsel's investigations focused on efforts by Trump and his allies to overturn the results of the 2020 election he lost to Democratic President Joe Biden. Former Vice President Mike Pence has decided not to appeal a judge's ruling requiring him to testify on a grand jury in that investigation about conversations he had with Trump ahead of the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol by Trump supporters, a Pence spokesperson said on Wednesday. Smith's other investigation focuses on classified documents that Trump retained after leaving office. The FBI on Wednesday declined to comment on Trump's remarks. The Justice Department did not respond to a request for comment. Reducing funding for federal law enforcement also would not affect another criminal investigation involving Trump led by a county prosecutor in Georgia, focusing on whether he unlawfully sought to overturn the 2020 election loss in that state. And then this goes into the current case in Manhattan. The office of Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, charged Trump on Tuesday with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records over allegations that he orchestrated payments to two women before the 2016 election to suppress publication of their sexual encounters with him. Prosecutors said the payments to adult film actress Stormy Daniels and former Playboy model Karen McDougal constituted an attempt to conceal a violation of election law. Opinion polls show Trump as the frontrunner of the 2024 Republican presidential nomination as he seeks to deny Biden a second term in office. Trump, over the years, has complained that law enforcement at the national and state level were targeting him for political purposes, which is completely insane, right? Like, why would they be targeting him for political purposes? And his fellow Republicans in Congress have held hearings to examine what they described as the weaponization of government. Which it is. And actually, that whole part of it really reminds me of, I interviewed Matt Taibbi back in 2019, and we were talking about the Russiagate investigations, and he was really, warning about the weaponization of the Justice Department and, the U.S. justice in general, and talking about how it was really going to turn America into a basket case country where, from now on, we're just going to see Republicans investigating Democrats, Democrats investigating Republicans. And, it really does turn things kind of upside down where you can't have any kind of, again, working across the aisle is typically not that great as it typically leads to, for example, imperialist foreign policy and whatnot. But, potentially if you were to have any kind of good legislation, you're not going to get that passed because, again, you're just having both sides kind of view each other as the enemy. So going on here, Trump and his allies have accused Bragg, a Democrat, of bringing the charges for political reasons. Bragg, in comments after the charges were brought on Tuesday, said he has a responsibility to ensure everyone stands equal before the law. Trump appeared at an arraignment in New York on Tuesday before flying back to his home in Florida to make public remarks. He declared himself the victim of election interference without offering evidence. He never offers evidence, right? Everything that's against the regime is always baseless allegations without evidence, conspiracy theories. Quite unlike, the 5 years that they spent trying to prove that Trump was a Russian agent. And, of course, this is the best that they had to show after all of that. The judge in the Manhattan case, Juan Merchan, has set the next hearing for December 4th. So they're actually not going to meet about this again for 8 months. December 4th, when campaigning for the Republican presidential nomination will be intensifying. Legal experts have said a trial may not start for a year. Indictment or even conviction does not legally prevent a person from running for president. In court on Tuesday, prosecutors raised concerns about Trump's social media posts, which have included a warning he made last month that the United States could face, quote, death and destruction if he were charged, and a posting of a photograph of him holding a baseball bat next to a picture of Bragg. Merchant asked Trump's lawyers to remind the former president to refrain from making statements likely to incite violence or civil unrest or jeopardize the safety of individuals. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said he does not agree with the charges brought against Trump. Quote, supposedly legal issues should not be used for electoral political purposes, López Obrador told a news conference in Mexico City. López Obrador, who took office in 2018, developed a friendly working relationship with then counterpart Trump, despite the U.S. president launching his 2016 election campaign by calling Mexican migrants rapists and drug runners and promising to make Mexico pay for a border wall. So, again, just on the subject of defunding the FBI, that's something that you would think that, the left would generally support. And again, I think it's another example of how we have seen the left, or the liberals in the United States get co-opted and taken over by neocons, because now you see not just them cheering a foreign policy, an imperialist foreign policy, a Bush foreign policy, but you also see them being champions of the FBI and the CIA. And again, Trump is obviously doing this for his own political purposes. As this story mentions, he was okay with increasing funding of the FBI during his time there. And this is something that Republicans just aren't going to support, because again, they're all law and order, establishment frauds themselves, so they're not gonna support this. But I think that the fact that you're seeing liberals against this, again, because it's Trump saying it, that just kind of shows how the liberal left establishment, or just rank and file Democrats in the U.S. have been co-opted by neocons. And if you want another example of why you may not want to support funding the FBI, here's another news story that I came across that I thought was pretty funny. This is actually from this morning. And again, folks, this stream today is brought to you by Budweiser Zero. It's the great taste of alcohol with none of the actual alcohol. So, FBI and Army members raided the wrong hotel room during a training exercise and detained a guest inside. Members of the FBI and the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, who were conducting a training exercise in downtown Boston, because, of course, why shouldn't the U.S. Army be doing exercises in downtown Boston, raided the wrong hotel room and detained the person inside before realizing their mistake, the FBI said in a statement to CNN. The FBI said its Boston division was helping the military with a training exercise around 10 p.m. Tuesday to, quote, simulate a situation their personnel might encounter in a deployed environment. Based on inaccurate information, they were mistakenly sent to the wrong room and detained an individual, not the intended role player, the FBI said. This is the head of U.S. intelligence here, folks. Arresting the wrong people. First and foremost, we'd like to extend our deepest apologies to the individual who was affected by the training exercise, USA SOC Lieutenant Colonel Mike Burns told CNN. The exercise was meant to enhance soldiers' skills to operate in realistic and unfamiliar environments, like downtown Boston, Burns said, adding the incident is under review. No one was injured, the FBI said. The incident took place at the Revere Hotel, Boston Common, according to the Boston Police Department. CNN has reached out to the hotel for comment. A Boston police incident report said officers were called to the hotel around 12:20 a.m. Wednesday, and were met by law enforcement agents conducting a training exercise. Local news reports said the person who was in the hotel room and detained by federal law enforcement is a Delta Airlines employee. The Atlanta-based airline told CNN it is looking into the alleged incident in Boston that may involve Delta people. So keep this in mind next time you're staying in a hotel room, folks. The Army and the FBI may burst into your room and mistakenly arrest you for no reason. So, that's just another example, folks. And something else I just wanted to bring up here in the whole Donald Trump arrest thing is, the way that Alvin Bragg has pitched this is we all stand equal before the law. But we clearly don't. And U.S. presidents don't. Because Donald Trump, as we know, he is part of the establishment, but he also reflected discontentment with the establishment. He's someone who obviously... Clinton and Biden, they hate. And Why have we never seen any charges against, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden? Do we really think that all of these people are so innocent that they haven't committed the same exact crimes that Donald Trump is being accused of, if not more? Barack Obama assassinated American citizens with drones, including a 16-year-old who was born in Denver. He assassinated him with a drone and assassinated women and children around the planet, not to mention his illegal wars against Syria and Libya. George W. Bush, his lies about Iraqi WMD, the CIA black sites where they were torturing people across the world. Abu Ghraib, he let New Orleans drown. He crashed the housing market in the U.S., putting people on the streets. Bill Clinton, all of the crimes that he committed, and Hillary Clinton as well, all of their associates who have met strange demises. Has that ever really been investigated? Has there really been a true investigation into Jeffrey Epstein and all of his clients? There isn't really law and order in the U.S. There isn't people standing on equal footing before the law. There's just people being targeted for political purposes, like Donald Trump has been, with the bullshit Russiagate investigation. And now, with these 34 counts of making false statements on election paperwork or whatever it is. So it's complete insanity. It's nonsense. And again, I don't know how anyone can actually buy into it unless you're just a complete Democrat sycophant where you just believe everything that the party does is right. And you would have to actually believe that these men are innocent, that Barack Obama and George W. Bush and Bill Clinton never did anything wrong. Donald Trump, he's the first president to ever do anything wrong, right? I mean, he's the first one ever charged, so that means he must be the first one who's ever done anything wrong. Like, who actually believes that nonsense? Just imagine how propagandized and how brainwashed you would have to be to actually think that Donald Trump is the first U.S. president who has ever committed any kind of crime. And it's not like, okay, most U.S. presidents who have ever lived aren't around anymore. These guys are around. These guys could be tried with crimes. George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, Republicans, by the way, are war criminals. They should be charged with war crimes. But no, we would never do that because instead we have Joe Biden giving George W. Bush medals. And we have Donald Trump being charged during the 2024 election when he is an announced candidate for the 2024 presidential election, because obviously it's a desperate move, and that's what it reeks of. It reeks of pure desperation and makes the Democrats look really bad, that the only thing that they can do to try to stop Trump at this point is to bring up bullshit charges. If you actually wanted to charge Donald Trump, charge him with, illegally assassinating an Iranian general. That was a war crime. Bring him up on those charges, and also bring up these guys for doing similar war crimes, which they all have done. But we would never see that because we don't actually have any kind of rules-based order, any kind of law within the United States, or holding U.S. officials account on a global scale, as they should be for being war criminals, and amongst other things. So with that, let's move on here. On the subject of U.S. imperialism, U.S. pledges $2.6 billion more in weapons aid to Ukraine. The U.S. unveiled $2.6 billion worth of military assistance that includes 3 air surveillance radars, anti-tank rockets, and fuel trucks, the Pentagon announced on Tuesday, as Ukraine prepares for a spring offensive against invading Russian forces. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Tuesday told the U.S. National Governors Association that the United States could protect its values by helping Ukraine. Quote, "Our cooperation will allow for the new enhanced..." He said, give us more money and give us more arms, and that's what he said. The main thing is not to lose time, not to lose the chance we have. Act now. Help us. Give us money. Give us weapons. Ignore that they're ending up on the black market. Ignore that the weapons that you're sending are ending up in Africa. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. The Russian embassy in Washington reacted to the announcement by accusing the United States of wanting to drag out the conflict for as long as possible, Russian news agency TASS said. And why would we want to do that? I mean, it's not like people are making money off of it, right? It's not like the Democratic Party is making any kind of money through funds being being laundered through Ukraine. It's not like, Raytheon or Boeing are making any kind of money off this war. Why would we possibly want to extend this conflict? It's not like there's a black market for weapons that are ending up all around the world. That's absurd. That's a conspiracy theory is what that is. The decision to supply weapons to Kiev is a step towards escalating the Ukrainian crisis and increasing the number of civilian casualties, it cited an embassy statement as saying. The weapons aid package was comprised of $2.1 billion from Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative funding, which allows President Joe Biden's administration to buy weapons from industry rather from U.S. weapon stocks. The USAI package includes additional munitions for NASAMS, air defenses that the U.S. and allies have given to Kiev, precision aerial munitions, Soviet-era Grad rockets, anti-tank rockets, armored bridging systems used in assaults, and 105 fuel trailers, along with funding for training and maintenance. The remaining $500 million came from the Presidential Drawdown Authority funds, which allows the president to take from current U.S. stocks in an emergency. That segment of the package included a half dozen types of munitions, including munitions for Patriot air defense systems, tank munitions, and high-mobility artillery rocket systems, HIMARS. Last month, Leopard 2 battle tanks pledged by Germany and Portugal reached Ukraine. The package announced on Tuesday includes 61 heavy fuel tankers and recovery vehicles to help disabled heavy equipment like tanks. The U.S. has now pledged more than $35.2 billion worth of security assistance to Ukraine since the February 24th, 2022 invasion. On Monday, Ambassador Julianne Smith, the U.S. permanent representative to NATO, said that Washington expects Ukraine to put forward or begin some sort of their own spring offensive in the weeks ahead. So again, folks, just more of your tax dollars going to fund a proxy war with Russia, the most nuclear armed country on the planet Earth, and as an extension of that, here's another story from this past week. New NATO initiative to pave the way for Ukraine's accession. NATO wants to pave the way for Ukraine's planned accession to the alliance with a new support program, Secretary General Jen Stoltenberg said on Wednesday. The initiative, which is set to run for several years, is intended to help the country adapt to alliance standards and enable seamless cooperation, Stoltenberg said. NATO foreign ministers were gathered for a 2-day meeting in Brussels to admit Finland into the alliance and discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Stoltenberg said the plan was a clear sign that NATO was continuing long-term support, but he did not give a precise time perspective for Ukraine's entry. He didn't specify the length of the program. NATO's position is that Kiev will become a member, Stoltenberg said, referencing a 2008 summit declaration from the alliance concerning Ukraine and Georgia. Again, folks, this was pushed by the Bush administration. The Bush administration, as part of their neocon worldview, the same worldview that led to the invasion of Iraq and the demonization of Iran and North Korea as being part of an axis of evil, and eventually led to conflict with Syria and Libya as Obama embraced that same neocon foreign policy. That's what is behind Ukraine joining NATO, and that was behind the coup in 2014 and everything that the U.S. was doing before then. Again, as we've covered on the show, even as far back as 2005 with the Orange Revolution, the color revolutions that were happening in Ukraine. This is something that was orchestrated by the Bush administration, and this is something that we're still seeing pursued today because the people in power, the neoliberals are also neocons. It's all part of the same thing, the same Washington-based imperialist order. Quote, "We agreed today that these countries will become members of NATO," the NATO declaration said. Stoltenberg indirectly ruled out Ukraine joining in time of war. He pointed out that a prerequisite for NATO membership was that Ukraine survive the war as a democratic, independent nation. Because that's what it was before, right? That's what it was after the coup that overthrew their government in 2014. How is it a democracy when your elected government was overthrown by Western-backed protesters and NGO-affiliated protesters, Nazis also, right sector and Azov Nazis, and who then proceeded to criminalize the Communist Party, and over the last couple of years has also criminalized 11 other political parties as well as independent media. How is that a democratic nation? It's not. And, of course, the United States isn't a democratic nation either, but United States Secretary Anthony Blinken said that the U.S. focus was on, quote, "doing what needs to be done to help Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression," in reference to NATO membership for Ukraine. Talks in the early stages are considered a support program for 10 years and providing Ukraine with around 500 million euros or $545 million annually, according to NATO diplomats. According to NATO diplomats, the funding could also be used to support additional exercises, digitization programs, and institutional reforms. So again, folks, this is just seemingly suicidal. And by the way, doesn't this look like the scene from Dr. Strangelove here? This is weird circular desk that everybody's sitting at. It looks like the war room from Doctor Strange. I'm sorry, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Classic 1962 Stanley Kubrick film, if you haven't seen it. But yeah, this just seems like it's really sad. It's really suicidal, and it just speaks to what our ambitions have been all along. Again, since 2008, it has been stated that we were going to colonize Ukraine on behalf of NATO, and we did. We worked towards that through an illegal 2014 coup. And this is what liberals always ignore when they talk about the illegal Russian invasion in 2022. They ignore that it has been the stated policy of NATO to colonize Ukraine since 2008, since the Bush regime, that he was actually had NGOs working to disrupt Ukraine in the years prior to that. That we were funding Nazis and working with these right-wing groups in Ukraine. That there was polling done before the 2014 coup that showed that a majority of Ukrainians were against joining NATO, and that there was an illegal coup in 2014 that was backed by the United States. And again, you could go right to John McCain and Chris Murphy taking part in the illegal anti-democratic protests against the Ukrainian government right there in Kiev, as the U.S. members of the United States Senate, the U.S. government there in person, playing a role in the coup against the Ukrainian government, the elected Ukrainian government. And again, since that coup, and since Victoria Nuland handpicking the Ukrainian government that was to take hold after that coup, a criminalization of left-wing parties, a criminalization of media, and also a genocide that took place in the Donbass from 2014 to 2022, where there was, as many international organizations said, Amnesty International and the Red Cross and all these different international organizations said, there was illegal actions taking place against the citizens of the Donbass. There was a genocide. There was war crimes taking place by U.S.-backed Nazis, the Azov Battalion and the Adar Battalion. And we're just supposed to completely ignore all of that. Just ignore the decades, ignore anything that happened before February of 2022. Also including COVID. Just ignore that happened. Forget that ever happened. Just complete Men in Black brain wipe. Just forget everything. It's all about Russian aggression. But here's the problem with all of that, with that propaganda. It's clearly bullshit. And again, you'd have to be a complete partisan hack, a completely brainwashed sycophant to actually buy into that. But it's also clearly demonstrably bullshit because the world order, the Washington world order, is falling apart. And Washington's allies can't even stick together on, as part of the offensive against Russia. And we saw this past week with Japan. And this is from Daily Mail. Japan breaks with Western allies and buys Russian oil above $60 a barrel cap after OPEC cartel in Moscow slashed production and forced prices higher. Japan is now the only G7 nation that is buying Russian crude above the cap, which was agreed upon by the allies after the invasion of Ukraine. Nation has almost no fossil fuel and relies on Russia import for energy needs. The move is a break with U.S.-led efforts to impose a $60 a barrel cap, but according to the Wall Street Journal, Japan got the U.S. to agree with the exception. Japan is now buying Russian crude oil above a $60 a barrel cap after OPEC Plus slashed production, forcing prices even higher. The country is now the only G7 nation that is buying Russian crude above the cap, which was agreed upon by the allies after the invasion of Ukraine. The island nation has almost no fossil fuels of its own. Okay, so just we're repeating ourselves here. The point, folks, is that even among Europe, even among Western allies like Japan, we're seeing breaks, right? We're seeing cracks because these are imperialist powers, for the most part, that don't have a lot of natural resources and depend on exploiting the third world and the rest of the world outside of the transatlantic partnership. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing that they are dependent upon oil from these other countries and other natural resources. And apart from that, we're also seeing an abandonment of the US dollar. So let's talk about that. That was another big news story from last week. China and Brazil strike a deal to ditch dollar for trade. China and Brazil have reached a deal to trade in their own currencies, ditching the US dollar as an intermediary, the Brazilian government said Wednesday, Beijing's latest salvo against the almighty greenback. The deal will enable China, the top rival to U.S. economic hegemony, and Brazil, the biggest economy in Latin America, to conduct their massive trade and financial transactions directly, exchanging yuan for real and vice versa, instead of going through the dollar. The expectation is that this will reduce costs, promote even greater bilateral trade, and facilitate investment, the Brazilian Trade and Investment Program Agency, Apex Brazil, said in a statement. China is Brazil's biggest trading partner with a record $150.5 billion in bilateral trade last year. The deal, which follows a preliminary agreement in January, was announced after a high-level China-Brazil business forum in Beijing. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was originally scheduled to attend the forum as part of a high-profile China visit, but had to postpone his trip indefinitely Sunday after he came down with pneumonia. The Industrial and Commercial Bank of China and Bank of Communications BBM will execute the transactions, officials said. China has similar currency deals with Russia, Pakistan, and several other countries. So again, folks, this is really, this is the larger news that we're seeing, outside of just, the oil itself. We're seeing these countries now ditching the U.S. dollar. And this happens, of course, as the Federal Reserve is trying to fight inflation, as we're seeing all of these banks collapse, like Silicon Valley Bank. And it's really putting the United States in a very precarious position, especially look back at some of the conflicts that we've had with other countries, right? If you research what was happening in Iraq and in Libya prior to the invasions that happened there, that was because those countries were ditching the U.S. dollar. Saddam Hussein in 2000 started selling oil for euros, which was a real blow to the the petrodollar system. And that was, a motivating factor in why we invaded there. Same thing with Libya. Gaddafi had announced wanting to pursue a gold dinar, and that led to him being, couped and killed, murdered in the streets. So, the basis of Western imperialism really is the US dollar and the petrodollar system. And when you start seeing things like this that's really challenging that economic hegemony, then you're starting to see real cracks in the Western Washington world order. And if you want to know, really why that is, Marco Rubio actually summarized that on Fox News. He explained, as a diehard neocon imperialist, him being in favor of Washington hegemony, he is decrying this as a terrible thing, but he explains perfectly why Brazil and China ditching the dollar is such a terrible thing.
Today, Brazil, in our hemisphere, largest country in the Western Hemisphere south of us, cut a trade deal with China. They're going to, from now on, do trade in their own currencies, get right around the dollar. They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them. Today, Brazil.
We won't have the ability to sanction them. They won't mean anything. Exactly. So, again, this is a real challenge to U.S. Western hegemony. And, folks, if the economy keeps going the way it is going, if we start seeing more banks collapse and we see the Federal Reserve have to pivot as they seem to already be doing and start printing more money and exacerbating inflation, things are going to get really interesting, especially if we're also trying to pursue, this war. And, it also, honestly, it gets a little scary because if there is a move among the world to move away from the dollar, if the dollar starts losing its value, that's when you're going to see Washington and the neocons get really psychotic. And again, we've seen them lash out violently against Iraq, against Libya. What's going to happen when the dollar really starts losing its value and people stop using it as a reserve currency? That's when things are really going to start heating up with Russia, with China. And, Bulgaria, Iran, North Korea, Syria, Venezuela, pretty much the rest of the world outside of Europe and Japan. So, folks, I just wanted to end today. I appreciate you joining me for this live stream today. And actually, I did see that I did get a $2 super chat by Sinead. And it says, "So glad to see you back." Thank you, Sinead. I appreciate it. But I did want to end today on a lighthearted note. We're talking about something that's, not the end of the world here. And, well, I guess it is, it's the end of the wrestling world, I suppose. This was a news story that came up the last couple of days. WWE, which is World Wrestling Entertainment, formerly known as the World Wrestling Federation, if you watched wrestling back in the 80s and 90s. World Wrestling Entertainment agrees to merge with UFC to create a new company run by Ari Emanuel and Vince McMahon. So we're going to show this here. And by the way, folks, again, if you know who Vince McMahon is, and if you'd see him the last couple of years, he looked like quite an old man, and he had gray hair. And he had suffered. I don't know if this article goes into it, but he had there have been sexual misconduct allegations against him last year, and he actually had left WWE temporarily, and then he came back. And how did he come back? He came back with hair dyed with what looks like shoe polish and a pencil-thin mustache, and just looking like Snidely Whiplash or J. Jonah Jameson or something. It's very bizarre to see him. Okay. Sorry, folks. There's a little hiccup with OBS there. But anyway, I wanted to get into this article here. This is from CNBC. It says, Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Entertainment has agreed to merge with UFC to form a new publicly traded company controlled by Endeavor Group, the company announced Monday morning. Endeavor will own a 51% stake in the new combat sports and entertainment company, while WWE shareholders will have the remaining 49%. So Endeavor, representing the UFC side, is going to have a controlling stake in this company, and apparently all WWE shareholders, WWE being a publicly traded company, is going to have a minority share in this new company. The deal values WWE at $9.3 billion and UFC, which is owned by Endeavor, at $12.1 billion, the company said in a press release. The transaction is expected to close in the second half of 2023. Shares of WWE fell more than 2%, and Endeavor declined over 5% on Monday. Ari Emanuel will act as chief executive of both Endeavor and the new company, the company said. McMahon, likewise, will be executive chairman, while Endeavor president and COO Mark Shapiro will also work in the same roles at the new company. Dana White will remain as president of UFC, and WWE CEO Nick Khan will stay on as president of the wrestling business. This is going to be UFC 2.0, Emanuel said in an interview that aired Monday on CNBC's Squawk on the Street. The board will consist of 11 people, 6 appointed by Endeavor and 5 by WWE. The merged company's name will be announced at a later time. The company will trade on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol TKO. The announcement confirmed an earlier CNBC report. It also came a day after WWE wrapped up its flagship live event, WrestleMania, in California. The company has spent the past several months looking for a buyer. McMahon returned to WWE as chairman in January to oversee the process. WWE has a market valuation of about $6.5 billion. Endeavor has a market cap of $10 billion. The agreement would pair two of the biggest sports entertainment brands in the world. Despite notable differences, one being scripted and one possibly sometimes being scripted, maybe. WWE features scripted matches and soap opera-like storylines, while UFC showcases authentically brutal mixed martial arts fighting. The organizations share similarities in terms of content and culture. Several UFC fighters, including Ronda Rousey and Brock Lesnar, have already wrestled for WWE. And the first, going back to Ken Shamrock. Let's not forget Ken Shamrock, who was a guest on this show, by the way, on episode 100. So if you'd like to go back to episode 100, you can hear my interview with Ken Shamrock. UFC champion and superstar Conor McGregor lauded news of the pending deal Sunday evening. Incredible. What a powerhouse, he said in one tweet, following up with another tweet displaying the image of him brandishing UFC and WWE championship belts. WWE offers Endeavor shareholders a muscular media and live event business, as well as decades worth of intellectual property. The company generated $1.29 billion in revenue last year, driven mainly by its $1 billion media unit. Endeavor knows the business of WWE, Emanuel said in a recorded investor presentation Monday. WWE's media rights deal for traditional TV and streaming are up for renewal in the coming months. Endeavor owns the WME talent agency and has used its expertise in media rights, celebrity, and live events to grow UFC's revenue to $1.3 billion last year, up 20% from a year earlier. The company plans to run the same playbook with WWE. We have a track record of success in media rights, blah, blah, blah. End of a family business. Emanuel told CNBC he asked McMahon to stay with the combined company as executive chairman. McMahon said he didn't have to be convinced to stick around with what's been a family business for decades. McMahon's father founded WWE in its original incarnation during the middle of the 20th century. And actually, I believe his grandfather, Jesse McMahon, was a wrestling promoter like back in the 1920s or something. McMahon, who bought the company from his father in 1982, is the controlling shareholder. Over the past 4 decades, WWE has grown into a global phenomenon, spawning breakout stars such as Hulk Hogan, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Dave Bautista, and John Cena. No mention of Ric Flair, Macho Man Randy Savage, Steve Austin. None of them. Really? Batista? It's a great day, said McMahon. Things have to evolve. Family businesses have to evolve for all the right reasons. McMahon, 77, retired from the company in July following a string of revelations that he paid several women millions of dollars over the years to keep them quiet about alleged affairs and misconduct. Why is he not being charged by Alvin Bragg? Hey, Alvin Bragg, there you go. Slam dunk case for you. Over the summer, WWE acknowledged that other entities were investigating the hush payments. The Wall Street Journal had reported about federal probes into the matter. McMahon's daughter, Stephanie McMahon, became co-CEO alongside Khan. Paul Levesque, who's both Stephanie McMahon's husband and wrestler known as Triple H, took over creative duties from Vince McMahon. After Vince McMahon came back in January, Stephanie McMahon stepped down and Khan fully assumed the CEO role. The elder McMahon recently locked in a 2-year employment contract, according to a securities filing. I've made mistakes both personally and professionally, McMahon acknowledged in his CNBC interview. McMahon told CNBC he won't be in the weeds with WWE's creative decisions and when the companies merge. So, again, folks, I just found this to be really something that I didn't ever expect to see. I didn't ever think that UFC and WWE were going to become the same company. So, just an interesting little tidbit for you, especially if you're a wrestling fan or a mixed martial arts fan. And this other thing caught my eye here. What is this? Ukraine war live updates. Kiev potentially willing to negotiate on Crimea. Wagner boss says Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut not going anywhere. So let's close with this story. And this just popped up on the side of my screen here on CNBC. How do I? Come on. Close. Kiev has disclosed a rare willingness to negotiate with Russia. Again, folks, another telltale sign. There's cracks emerging here. Kiev has disclosed a rare willingness to negotiate with Russia, depending on the outcome of its spring offensive. A top advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in an interview. The discussions would focus on Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula, which Moscow illegally annexed in 2014. Didn't they have a referendum? Wasn't there referendums in the Donbass too? I'll just ignore that, I guess. And would take place if Ukrainian forces reach Crimea's administrative border, the official said. Swedish investigators examining last year's Nord Stream pipeline blast say it remains unclear who was behind the sabotage. How about, could it be the guy who threatened to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline back in February of 2022? Could it be that guy? I think his name's Joe Biden. But that work on the case is continuing unconditionally. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron is in China for a 3-day state visit. Cracks emerging, folks, during which he hopes to dissuade Beijing from supporting Russia in its war in Ukraine, among other things. What is this one? Russia's defense minister visits a weapons facility. Okay. Well, anyway, folks, I appreciate you joining me today and going over these headlines. Again, I'm really encouraged by the fact that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is going to be running for president. Again, I know that probably makes me a mark, right? To use a wrestling term. I'm being a mark and buying into the kayfabe. But, it's great to see somebody out there who's speaking out against the regime, against somebody, with his background, with the gravitas of his family name. And, I think it shows courage for him to be part of this process because, again, we're going to see him be character assassinated to no end throughout this process. We're going to see them go after him, calling him a Russian stooge, I'm sure, for his foreign policy. We're going to see them call him a conspiracy theorist and anti-science, and he wants to push policies that would hurt people. I'm sure we're going to hear all of this, and they're going to throw everything with the kitchen sink at him. So it displays a real moral courage and conviction on Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s part to take part in this process, given that they're going to see real venom and vindictiveness against him. So, Sinead sent me another super chat. Thank you. Sinead says, really, really glad you're back. Thank you for the 2 super chats, Sinead. Appreciate that. And Linda, thank you for the $5 super chat. I appreciate it, folks. And as we know, I've had a couple of hiatuses over the past year, and again, a few folks, could you continue to support me and keep the show going? I'd appreciate it. Hopefully, I have some new interviews coming up soon. Again, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., you're welcome on the show if you'd like to come on. But yeah, hopefully we'll have some big interviews coming up, and hopefully I can get back in the routine of doing these streams. So thank you everybody for watching. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate the super chats. Again, if you could also become a patron at patreon.com/Primo Radical, I'd appreciate it. And thanks again, folks. Until next time.